The gown was still warm when they found it, perfectly arranged on the cold marble floor, as if its owner had simply vanished mid-step. No blood, no signs of struggle, just the lingering scent of lavender, and silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Before we go further, like this video, subscribe to DeadScroll, and share this story with someone who thinks they know how the world works. What you're about to hear is not just mystery, it's forbidden truth. And you need to see this to the very end. Now, let's begin. December 1891, Ashbourne, Massachusetts. A town untouched by war, politics, or the grinding filth of industrial cities, at least on the surface. Behind the brick walls and clipped hedges of the New England elite, something else thrived. Silence, secrecy, and control. The kind of control that doesn't show up in newspapers. The kind that works quietly, through inheritance, through marriage, through loyalty, or fear. Elizabeth Altham was not born into that world. She married into it. At just 22, she became the wife of Charles Altham, banking magnate, philanthropist, and one of the wealthiest men in the American Northeast. Their estate, known as Thornfield Grove, overlooked the harbor like a fortress. Iron gates, imported stone, no neighbors for miles. And within its walls, the house had rules. No questions, no locked doors, no sudden noises after midnight. On the evening of December 9th, the servants found Elizabeth's bedroom empty. Her dress, a pale ivory silk piece made in Paris, had been left neatly folded at the foot of her bed. The fire in her hearth was still glowing. Her jewelry untouched. No note, no clue, no trace. But there's something they didn't report in the newspapers. Elizabeth had spent the final weeks of her life in a strange state, asking odd questions, requesting maps, requesting church records, requesting files from a psychiatric hospital that had been shut down in 1858. According to her lady's maid, Elizabeth had whispered something the night before she vanished. They lied to me. All of them. Even Charles. Especially Charles. And then, she was gone. What began as a missing person case would unravel into something far more ancient. Something engineered. A system. A pattern. A ritual. And Elizabeth had found the key. The official story was simple. Far too simple for a woman like Elizabeth. The morning papers ran polite headlines. Society wife vanishes from Ashbourne estate. Police investigate routine disappearance. But behind the closed doors of Thornfield Grove, nothing was routine. Every servant was questioned. Every room was searched. Yet not a single footprint, not a single disturbed object, suggested that Elizabeth had ever left the house. She was just gone. But here's where it begins to splinter. Elizabeth wasn't the first to disappear from Thornfield Grove. In 1876, a governess named Margaret Hayes was hired for Charles's younger sister. She worked for exactly 6 weeks, then left abruptly in the middle of the night. No resignation, no farewell, just a note scrawled in near illegible handwriting. They come through the walls. The family paid to keep it quiet. In 1862, during renovations to the West Wing, a construction worker fell through a rotted floorboard. He broke both legs and was dragged from the property before he could speak to reporters. His final statement, overheard by a housemaid and later buried in police records, was this: "There are rooms that shouldn't be there. These aren't rumors. These are patterns. Patterns that Elizabeth noticed." In her final week, she had begun compiling her own investigation. She visited the Ashbourne Town Records office, searching through death registries. She sent letters to the Historical Society. She requested, through her solicitor, property maps that predated the current Thornfield structure. And most disturbing of all, she met with a nun. Sister Agatha, age 89, retired from a cloistered convent in Vermont. The meeting took place at 2:10 p.m. on December 8th. Witnesses say Elizabeth emerged visibly shaken, pale, breathless, muttering. They promised to keep them sealed. That was less than 24 hours before she disappeared. None of this was known to the public. Charles Altham refused interviews. He sent his wife's belongings to be boxed and locked in the attic. The household was ordered to continue as if nothing had happened. But someone knew something, because 1 week later, An unsigned letter arrived at the Ashbourne Gazette. The envelope contained only one sentence. She found the third staircase. You're going to want to see what lies beneath that staircase. Stick around. This goes deeper than you think. The third staircase wasn't marked on any blueprint. Not in the 1844 construction plans. Not in the 1857 expansion orders. Not in the 1870 revisions when Thornfield Grove underwent extensive modernization. According to all known records, the mansion contained two primary staircases, the grand front hall ascent, and the modest servant spiral in the east wing. But Elizabeth knew better. Her diary, retrieved by her cousin months after her disappearance, contains a chilling entry, dated December 5th. It is behind the panel. I've measured the walls, and the numbers do not lie. There is a space unaccounted for, 5 feet wide, descending. I heard the sound again tonight. Soft, like breath behind plaster. She wasn't the first to measure. In 1884, a visiting architect named Horace Lindwell toured Thornfield with interest in its supposed Georgian symmetry. He left abruptly halfway through the visit, refusing payment, muttering about spatial lies and inverted halls. His journal, later recovered by his son, describes an architectural impossibility. If the dining room extends 12 paces from a gallery wall, and the Western study does the same, there must be a gap between. But there isn't. On paper, it aligns. In reality, something is missing, or hiding. The panel Elizabeth mentioned was located in the West Gallery, behind a Flemish tapestry depicting Saint Margaret and the dragon. That tapestry had hung in the same spot since 1868, placed there by Charles's mother, Lady Isadora, after the incident that was never publicly named. When a local constable finally forced open the panel in 1892, under pressure from Elizabeth's family, they found a narrow shaft of stairs spiraling down into earth. Not brick, not stone, but raw earth. No light fixtures, no railings, just compact soil slick with moisture and the smell of iron and something else, something wrong. They descended exactly 29 steps before the tunnel collapsed behind them. The case was officially closed 3 days later. The disappearance was ruled voluntary, and the staircase was filled with concrete under order of the Ashbourne magistrate. But the rumors did not stop, because that same night, a second letter arrived at the Gazette. No return address, no fingerprints. This time, the message read, "There is no bottom, only descent. This isn't a ghost story. This is a cover-up, and we're going further." Elizabeth Belgrave did not come from obscurity. She was born Elizabeth Araminta Rowan, daughter of Judge Ambrose Rowan, the very man who oversaw the 1861 witchcraft hearings in East Wickham. Her lineage was old money, older than her husband's. The Rowans had roots tracing back to Cromwellian times. Quiet power, the kind that doesn't ask questions, it issues consequences. So when Elizabeth vanished, the shock wasn't just emotional, it was political. Ashbourne's elite weren't mourning. They were panicking. What does it mean when one of them disappears without explanation? Within 72 hours, 4 men arrived at Thornfield Grove. Not constables, not local. They wore no insignias, no names, just long coats and the same black boots. They asked for no permission. They removed all of Elizabeth's belongings from her quarters, sealed off her study, and confiscated her diary. The one entry already leaked by her cousin, now gone missing. They left at dawn. No statements. No trace. 3 days later, Judge Rowan was found dead in his reading chair. Coroner ruled it heart failure, but every vein in his left arm had burst. A servant reported hearing shouting just an hour before, one voice. "Mail. Cold." Repeating the phrase. "You open the door." But what door? By then, whispers had already begun to circulate in the Ashbourne Gentlemen's Club. Not about Elizabeth's fate, but about what she may have found. Old men who remembered Thornfield's foundations. The rumors that the house was built on older ground. That Thornfield Grove was never meant to be a home, but a lid. A lid over something buried long before. A decade earlier, during landscaping renovations, laborers unearthed a stone basin. Circular, carved with symbols that no one could identify. The basin was quietly removed before sunrise. But according to an anonymous letter published in the Ashbourne Evening Post, Elizabeth found sketches of it in her husband's desk, labeled only. Basin number 3, not to be disturbed. And she disturbed it. Whatever was beneath Thornfield, she sought it, measured it, documented it. And when she got too close, she vanished. Not in spirit, in flesh. The people of Ashbourne were told to forget. But you're here now, and we're not forgetting. Not until the whole thing is unearthed. By the end of that cold April week, Thornfield Grove was no longer a home. It was a fortress. Every curtain drawn, every gate padlocked. Only one window on the 3rd floor remained ajar. Elizabeth's former study, its lace drapery swaying in windless air. Inside, not even the servants spoke above a whisper, because something was wrong. Not just missing, wrong. The air inside the estate had changed, hardened, thickened. Animals would not enter the east gardens. The birds that once perched near the manor's eaves had abandoned it entirely. And the family's 2 bloodhounds, once kept as guard animals, were found trembling in the wine cellar, jaws locked shut. One later died without visible wound or cause. But the family doctor did visit, and he, too, disappeared. Dr. Hiram Lowenstein, aged 58, respected and sharp, entered Thornfield Grove on April 27th, responding to a request made in Lord Belgrave's own handwriting. He entered through the east door at 6:14 p.m. The butler, Jonas Hill, recorded the time in his logbook. He never left. No carriage tracks. No footsteps. No sign. Lord Belgrave told police the doctor must have left without announcement. He even provided a forged note, later confirmed to be in his handwriting. But Lowenstein's bag, coat, and pocket watch were still on the coat rack inside. Why would he leave everything behind? Jonas Hill resigned 2 days later. He refused his final month's pay. And before leaving Ashbourne entirely, he gave one final, cryptic statement to a traveling journalist. Something in that house breathes that shouldn't. But the word that changed everything came from Lowenstein's niece. A letter, dated May 1st, 1891, and addressed to a friend in Norwich. She wrote that her uncle had sent her a strange package the week before his visit to Thornfield. Inside was a glass vial containing a thick black substance, labeled simply, "Sample from beneath." He'd included one sentence: "If I disappear, do not let them find this." But the letter was intercepted. She never saw it again. Until now. Because the letter reappeared, anonymously published 47 years later in a banned volume known only as the Ashbourne Codex. And what's written on the next page is what we'll uncover next. The Ashbourne Codex was never meant to be read. Only 13 copies were printed. Most were seized within weeks. One was burned publicly in Birmingham by order of the Anglican Ecclesiastical Tribunal in 1939. Another was found beneath the floorboards of a London boarding school, wrapped in animal hide and sealed with iron nails. That copy remains missing, but one survived, and in that surviving volume, on page 217, the reprinted letter from Dr. Lowenstein's niece appears with a chilling margin note, scribbled in Latin. They belong to the old soil, not born, not dead, only released. Released from where? That's the question no one in Ashbourne wanted answered. Because beneath Thornfield Grove, beneath the limestone and bedrock, is a natural cavern network stretching for miles. Long before the Belgraves built their empire, before even the founding of Ashbourne, local druids believed the land beneath was sacred or cursed. They called it Gwynna's Hollow, the hollow of the unwept. And what few records exist tell of a presence beneath the earth. Not a ghost, not a spirit, something older, something uncontained, something that had been fed, ritually, for centuries. What does this have to do with Elizabeth Belgrave? According to the Codex, a second item was sealed in the package Dr. Lowenstein sent his niece, an oil-stained page from a private physician's journal. It detailed a secret Elizabeth kept from everyone. She was never supposed to conceive. Multiple doctors had confirmed it. Scarred tissue, malformed structures, a womb unfit for childbearing. And yet, in January 1891, Elizabeth told Lowenstein she was pregnant. Naturally, she claimed the child wasn't just healthy. It had begun speaking to her in dreams. And in one of those dreams, it told her what lay beneath Thornfield Grove and how to awaken it. You see, Elizabeth had been digging, not herself, but through hired men, foreign laborers who could not speak English. They cleared out a sub-basement that no previous map had recorded. They removed 6 tons of earth. And at the lowest point of that excavation, they found a circular shaft. Lowenstein examined it. He wrote that it was not man-made and not meant to be found, but someone or something had been waiting inside it. The shaft was 12 feet in diameter, lined with a black moss that absorbed light. No ladder, no end in sight. Lowenstein dropped a stone. He never heard it land. In his notes, he wrote that standing near it too long produced a headache behind the eyes, followed by an urge to descend. He forbade Elizabeth from returning, but she had already been there, more than once, alone. She told him the dreams intensified near the pit, that she heard voices, but not in English, not in any human language. They speak in breath, she wrote, as if the earth exhales their names. Then she began carving symbols into her arms. One morning, Elizabeth's chambermaid found her in the music room, barefoot, drenched in soil, humming a melody no one recognized. Her fingernails were caked in blood. When questioned, she didn't respond, but her mouth moved. Over and over again, "It's not inside me. It's below." The codex includes a diagram Lowenstein sketched after her episode, not of her condition, but of a geometric spiral. He claimed it matched a carving he found on a large stone slab at the base of the shaft. The spiral had 9 turns. Each represented a cycle of sleep. But sleep for what? Elizabeth believed she was chosen, not to birth a child, but to wake something dormant, something sealed and hollow, something the Druids tried to suppress by flooding the lower chambers over 800 years ago. She wrote, they feared the roots would breach the surface, that one would live with memory. That phrase, with memory, appears again in section 3 of the Codex, in a different context. The one who carries memory opens the gate. Elizabeth began speaking in plural. We are dreaming. We remember. We are closer. Her diary became erratic. Phrases scratched out. Others in languages no one has identified. Then she stopped writing altogether. For days before her disappearance, she wrote only one sentence. The breath is rising through the walls. If there was one man in Ashbourne more feared than admired, it was Archibald Vere, magistrate, land baron, and the keeper of secrets no one dared speak aloud. When word reached him that Lowenstein's wife was speaking in dead tongues and wandering barefoot into the forest, he acted with calculated speed. He did not send a priest. He did not send a physician. He sent 4 men with torches. They arrived at Thornfield Grove just before midnight. Elizabeth was locked in the cellar by then, by her husband's hand, after she tried to climb into the shaft barefoot, murmuring about veins beneath the garden. The men demanded access to the manor. Lowenstein refused, until one of them showed a seal. Not a badge, not a crest. A small metal disc, engraved with the Vere sigil. 2 serpents eating each other's tails. That symbol, according to records unearthed later, was never public. It was for inner circle use only. Lowenstein stepped aside. The torches descended, not into the basement, not into the library, straight into the shaft room. They brought no rope, no light other than the torches, no tools, just the symbol. Within hours, 3 of the 4 men would vanish. The last was found half dead near the forest's edge the next morning. Clothes torn, eyes gouged out, arms carved in identical spirals. When asked what happened, he gasped 2 words before dying. She's below. Vere denied everything. No documentation. No burial. The shaft was sealed. The manor was purchased under a different name. Elizabeth's name erased from the census. But locals still remember the screams that echoed from beneath the hill that night. Not one voice. Many. In unison. Speaking as one. Even today, there's no record of a magistrate's investigation. No official report. No missing person case. Just the scorched floorboards and the disappearances that followed. The deeper you go into this story, the more you realize it wasn't about Elizabeth's disappearance at all. It was about something underneath her. Something she may have released. 10 days after the screaming stopped, a man arrived in Ashbourne. Foreign, educated, and completely unwelcome. He introduced himself as Dr. Everett Salim, an archaeologist from Oxford recently returned from a dig site in Theban necropolis. He was not interested in the manor, not interested in the wealthy. He came for one reason only, to find a shaft, or as he called it, the mouth of the dreaming root. Locals avoided him, called him cursed, but he stayed in the old apothecary's quarters and began collecting stories. Names, patterns, symbols. He carried with him a book, bound in green hide, ancient, marked with a symbol that nearly made the mayor drop dead on sight. 2 serpents, coiled, mouths open, eyes missing. Dr. Salim claimed this symbol had appeared on walls buried beneath thousands of years of sand. But more disturbingly, on the remains of bodies buried, standing up, facing east, their mouths sewn shut. He had seen it in Egypt. He had seen it in Syria. He had seen it in a collapsed tomb in a German forest that no one spoke of. And now it was in Ashbourne. He warned that if the shaft was not sealed in ritual, the root would continue growing, that the land would rot from within, that people would begin to vanish, not physically, but spiritually, their minds erased. Lowenstein refused to meet him. Magistrate Veer threatened expulsion. But Salim did not back down. He handed a letter to the town's only honest physician, Dr. Clara Winthall, and said, "When it begins, don't treat them. Run." 3 nights later, the town's cattle stopped eating. The soil turned black in perfect spirals. Children had the same dream, a woman calling them below. And one child, Benjamin Knox, woke up missing his tongue. It had been removed cleanly, with no signs of force, and no blood. That was the moment Ashbourne realized what had happened to Elizabeth. It wasn't madness. It was contact. Midway through the video, if you're still watching, comment the phrase, "The root remembers." Let's see who's truly listening. Now brace yourself. Dr. Clara Winthall wasn't a believer in the occult. She was rational, clinical, trained in Berlin under the Bavarian Rationalist Society. She believed in cause and effect, not curses. But when Dr. Salim handed her that letter, warning her not to treat what was coming, her hands began to tremble. That night, she broke into the Ashbourne Medical Registry and removed a locked file. One she'd seen before, marked in wax with a strange imprint. Not a hospital seal. Not from England. It was a circle, 3 lines from its center. No words, just a dark ring of pressure burned into the folder. Inside were Elizabeth's original examination notes, dated 2 weeks before her disappearance. But these were not written by Clara or any licensed physician in town. They were written in 3 separate hands, all anonymous, all foreign, and the first page read, "Subject identified as probable convict class 2. Vocal interference has begun. Root phrases detected in passive state. Total neural compromise imminent." The second page was worse. Drawings, diagrams, a map of the human throat layered with something that looked like vines. Not metaphorical, literal. Twisting lines in the soft tissue regions, marked with ink and annotations. Implantation suspected. Subject describes taste of chalk and salt. Night sweats correspond to root phase 1. Full manifestation pending. Dr. Winthall didn't know what any of it meant. But the last note was dated the night Elizabeth vanished. Voice has grown silent. Withdrawal complete. Next phase cannot proceed. Witnesses must be contained. This wasn't medical. It was containment protocol. Winthall ran to the apothecary, but Salim was gone. His room was ripped apart. Furniture smashed. Green book missing. On the wall, burned in ash, was a single word. Remember. That's when Winthall made a decision. She would not go to the magistrate. She would not go to Lowenstein. She would go to the one man who understood this kind of silence, the monk of Nettlegrave Hill. Midway through the video, if you're still watching, comment again. The root remembers. It tells us you're awake and watching. The monk of Nettlegrave Hill had no name, no history, no birth record, only whispers. People said he was blind, but could see sickness in people's shadows. They said he once served in the Crimean War, then disappeared into the Highlands after claiming he saw a wound that bled from the air. He had lived alone in the ruins of St. Hale's Chapel since 1851. That's where Dr. Windhall went, under the cover of fog, carrying only a lantern and Elizabeth's file. The old trail up the hill was overgrown, choked in brambles. But when she reached the chapel, the door was open and candlelight flickered within. The monk sat in silence on the stone floor, facing the altar, but he spoke without turning. "You found a folder, didn't you?" Windhall froze. "The root remembers," he continued, "even when the body forgets, even when the town pretends. That's why they sent her to me." She asked who sent Elizabeth. He answered, "Not a who. A what? Something old." Then he gave her a prophecy. He said there's a sickness that does not come from germs or blood or trauma. It comes from memory left too long in silence, from voices buried alive. It feeds on what people refuse to speak of, and Elizabeth had become its conduit. She began to echo, the monk whispered. Not mimicry, not madness. Echo. The sound of something else trying to re-enter this world through her breath. He claimed the implantation wasn't physical, it was mnemonic. A memory planted in the lungs, blooming into thought. He called it the breathing curse, and Ashbourne had seen it before. In 1814, 1792, even before the town had a name. Each time, the host vanished. Each time, the records were burned. But something always remained. Clara asked what they should do. The monk only gave her a torn page. A prayer, written backward. "Read this in the town square at midnight," he said. "If she answers, you'll hear her in the bells." She took it. She ran. But someone was waiting at the base of the hill. Someone she did not expect, at the base of Nettlegrave Hill. The mist thickened like a living thing. Dr. Windhall's boots slipped against the moss-covered stone path, her fingers still clutching the prayer the monk had given her. Then footsteps. A figure emerged from the fog, half shadow, half man, dressed in a dark overcoat, shoulders hunched. His eyes were unmistakable. Grayson Penmore. But he had died in 1886. Or, at least, that's what Ashbourne's obituary claimed. Windhall staggered back. Her mind spun, trying to reconcile memory with the living presence before her. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. Neither was he. Grayson had been Elizabeth's brother-in-law. Once a prominent spiritualist, he had vanished after an incident at the Ashbourne Opera House. The official record blamed tuberculosis. But there were rumors, whispers of seances gone wrong, of something following him after a communion rite he never finished. Now, 5 years later, he was standing in front of her, alive, breathing, changed. He reached into his coat and removed a small velvet pouch. Inside was a key, old, rusted, shaped like an inverted cross with a thorn motif etched into the teeth. This was hers, he said. He handed it to Clara. She used to wear it on a chain beneath her dress. Said open the Ashbourne room. Windhall didn't understand. No such room existed in the public registry. But Grayson's voice dropped. Not in the hotel. Not in the courthouse. Beneath the cathedral. Clara's heart turned to ice. Ashbourne Cathedral had been sealed off since 1853 after a partial collapse. But it was still patrolled, guarded, kept deliberately decayed. The town called it an eyesore. The records called it unstable. Grayson called it a containment. "There are things beneath this town," he said, "that should never echo again." Windhall demanded answers, but he only pressed the key in her hand and whispered, "If you read that prayer, you'll open something that doesn't want to stay closed." She fled into the night, unsure who to trust. The gate around Ashbourne Cathedral was rusted shut, or so the town believed. But when Clara Windhall pressed the thorn-toothed key into the side of the iron perimeter, something clicked. A low mechanical hiss echoed, and the gate slowly swung open, as though welcoming her home. The cathedral loomed overhead, charred black from the 1853 fire, its stained glass windows fractured like broken eyes. It had become a skeleton of worship, a ruinous frame holding back something it once glorified. Clara stepped inside. The air was thick with rot and mildew. Pews were overturned. The altar was gone. But beneath the pulpit, behind a half-burned tapestry of St. Margaret, she found it. A door, stone-framed, branded with the same inverted cross as the key. She hesitated, then unlocked it. The descent was immediate. A spiral staircase curved downward into the earth, far deeper than any basement should reach. The walls became colder, wet, etched with names not found in any Bible. There were whispers in the stone, not voices but impressions like ancient breathing. At the base, a corridor, and at the end, a single door. Above it, engraved in Latin, Lux ad inferos, light to the underworld. She pushed it open. The room was not a room. It was a ritual chamber. Mirrors covered the walls, not reflective but absorbing. In the center, a slab. Old blood stained its edges. Around it, 5 chairs, each draped in violet cloth, each facing inward. On the far wall, a portrait hung. Elizabeth Durham, alive, smiling, dressed in ceremonial white. Her hand rested on a black book chained to the floor. The same prayer Grayson had given her was carved into the frame in delicate handwriting. When Hall turned to leave, but the door was gone. The staircase had sealed. And then, from behind one of the cloth-draped chairs, a voice. "You've come at last, Clara." It was a woman's voice, and it sounded like Elizabeth. The chair shifted. Not fast, not violently, just enough. Clara froze as the cloth slid back, falling to the cold stone floor. There sat a figure, unmoving, dressed in faded ceremonial garments, skin gray as parchment, eyes wide open. The jaw hung low in a rictus of silent speech. The body was ancient, mummified by time and damp, but seated with intention. It hadn't fallen into death. It had been posed. And then another cloth dropped. Another body. Then another. 5 figures total. All seated. All robed. All facing the blood-stained slab in the center of the chamber. One chair remained empty. The one directly across from Elizabeth's portrait. Clara stepped closer. Her fingers trembled as she brushed the last cloth aside. Nothing. No body. Just an inscription carved into the stone of the seat. Lux ex sang, light from blood. It was a commandment. An instruction. She turned her eyes back to the slab. That's when she noticed the grooves cut along its sides. Not just stains of old sacrifice, but designed canals. They drained toward a basin at the base of the altar. It wasn't a relic. It was an engine. Something ancient. Still waiting to be powered. And then, from behind her, the mirrors on the wall began to shift. Not reflect. Not crack. Shift. As if something behind them was moving, peering through. Clara backed away, but the mirrors began to hum. Faint symbols emerged in the glass, glowing softly, synchronizing in rhythm. A low sound, almost a chant, started beneath her. Clara dropped the key. It clinked on the stone, and the voices, if they were voices, grew louder. Her flashlight flickered, and then, one by one, the eyes of the seated corpses opened. Not with life, not with awareness, but with light. An unnatural light, pale, violet, like the edge of a dying flame. Clara screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The air around her had become thick like water. She was inside something now, a chamber not a space, but of ritual memory. She reached for the wall, but the mirrors pulled her reflection in. Her image shattered, multiplying, and all of them were smiling. Just like Elizabeth, Clara didn't remember climbing the stairs. She didn't remember bursting out of the cathedral side door into the morning light. All she knew was that her lungs burned, her legs ached, and her fingers were covered in ash, though she hadn't touched fire. The cathedral loomed behind her, silent, still, like nothing had happened at all. But her ears still rang with the chants. The eyes still glowed behind her vision. She could still see the empty chair. It had been waiting for her. She stumbled into the center of Ashbourne. Morning fog hugged the cobbled streets. Bells tolled above. Her boots echoed across stone as she made her way toward the only place she could trust, the town records office. The clerk looked up from his desk, paused, then smiled too wide. "Miss Winthall," he said, "did you find what you were looking for beneath the Lord's house?" Clara froze. "I didn't tell you I went there." He only chuckled. "Of course not. Some things are inherited." She turned and bolted out the door. But outside, she noticed it. The people in the town square were all watching her. Not moving, not speaking, just staring. Old men, children, women in aprons. a priest, all with the same blank smile, and all wearing something violet. A ribbon, a scarf, a pin. Even the dogs were silent. She ran down the alley, past the bakery, toward the manor she had been staying in. But the moment she opened the door, it was different. Paintings were missing, bookshelves were empty, and on the parlor table sat a fresh envelope. Her name, written in her mother's handwriting. Inside, a folded parchment. One sentence. We were always meant to return. Clara dropped the letter. Her knees buckled. She remembered her mother's strange rules. The candles, the forbidden rooms, the locked drawers, her hushed conversations with people who never came to the door. She had always thought her mother was paranoid. But now she realized something darker. Her mother hadn't been afraid of the world. She had been afraid of what Clara would become. And maybe she was right. It was the night of November 2nd, 1891. Rain lashed the cobblestones. Wind howled through the skeletal trees that surrounded Went Hall Manor. Ashbourne was silent, too silent. Inside the manor, the staff had already retired. The gas lamps were dim. The fires long since died out. But Elizabeth Went Hall was still awake. She had taken to pacing the halls with her candle, as she often did those final weeks. Servants claimed she spoke to the walls. Whispers that weren't returned. Or worse, answered. That night, something changed. A scream ripped through the air. Not Elizabeth's. A man's. The coachman. His body was found 2 days later behind the stables. Face up. Eyes wide open. Veins blackened. Every bone shattered from the inside. No blood left in his body. But on that stormy night, neighbors claimed they saw her. Elizabeth. She was in the garden, barefoot, wearing a thin white nightgown that clung to her skin in the rain. Her arms were lifted, as if calling something down. And then the thunder stopped. The sky went silent, and the ground began to tremble. Mrs. Winthrop, the widow next door, claimed the trees behind the Went Hall estate began to bend inward, as if bowing. And that in the flash of lightning, she saw shapes surrounding Elizabeth. Shapes that flickered like shadows from another world. Not human, not animal, limbs too long, faces too smooth. She swore she saw them kneel before Elizabeth. And then she was gone. No one saw her leave. No carriage. No horses. No footprints. Just the rain. And a single message scratched into the greenhouse door with fingernail-like grooves. Let her awaken. The constable who investigated never filed a report. He retired 3 days later and refused to speak of it again. And the gardener? He fled town entirely. No one in Ashbourne ever said her name again. Not because they forgot, but because they remembered too well. And what they remembered terrified them. It was hidden behind the nursery wall, tucked beneath a loose brick, wrapped in silk now yellowed with age and heavy with the scent of lavender and ash. Clara Went Hall pulled it free with trembling hands. A diary. Its leather was cracked. The pages were warped from moisture. But the ink, somehow, had not faded. And on the first page, in an elegant hand, were 7 words that burned themselves into Clara's mind. To the girl who bears my name. Clara nearly dropped it. Her heart pounded. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned the page. Elizabeth's voice emerged through her writing. A voice frantic, trembling, lucid in places and completely unhinged in others. She wrote of dreams, but not dreams from sleep. Dreams from others. Things that came through the walls. Through mirrors. Through her own reflection. She wrote of the Ashbourne Vale, an ancient boundary that ran through the land long before the manor was built. She believed the estate was cursed because it sat atop it, a place where truth can slip through. Elizabeth warned of a return, a time when the veil would thin and the past would claw its way back into the present. And then Clara read a line that shattered her. When she returns, she must not remember. Clara stared in disbelief. Elizabeth had written about her. Not just some distant girl. Not a general warning. No, she called her by name. Clara. She described her face. Her eyes. Her birthmark. The strange marks she had always carried on her wrist, but could never explain. And worst of all, Elizabeth knew the exact date Clara would arrive in Ashbourne. August 1st, 1891. A date chosen at random by the university archivist who invited Clara to review the estate's records. Or so she thought. Now, nothing felt random. Clara dropped the diary, backed away, and looked around the room. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. Something was watching. Something that remembered Elizabeth, and had been waiting for Clara. The greenhouse stood silent in the back of the Ashbourne estate, half sunk in overgrowth, its glass ribs fogged by time. But tonight, Clara moved toward it with a clarity she hadn't felt in days. Because now she understood. Elizabeth hadn't just vanished. She'd left a map. The diary had whispered of glass. Not just reflections, but messages etched in shadow. And the greenhouse, with its wall of old panes and mirrored angles, was the place Elizabeth returned to night after night. Clara pushed open the door. The hinges screamed. Inside, the air was wet and sharp with the scent of rotting herbs. Ferns drooped like forgotten bodies. The glass above was fractured in patterns that looked more like glyphs than cracks. Clara lit her lantern and began scanning the glass. And then she saw it. Not words. Symbols. Etched into the inner panes in fine, swirling strokes. Almost invisible without flame. A circle with a line through it. An hourglass with no sand. A woman's face with no eyes. And then, a sentence in perfect cursive, scratched so lightly it shimmered in reflection. If you can read this, I am still here. Clara's chest seized. She stepped closer. Beneath it, another phrase, but not in the way you think. Clara turned. The room felt smaller. And in the far corner, the pane that had always been broken was no longer broken. She stepped closer. A shape began to take form, not outside the glass, but inside it. A smudge that moved with her. A distortion that lagged behind her reflection. And then the eyes appeared. Elizabeth's, or what used to be hers. Clara stumbled back, gasping, the lantern falling to the ground and sputtering out. In the silence that followed, she heard it. A whisper, not from her ears, but from her memory. Something Elizabeth had written. Mirrors lie, but glass remembers. Clara fled the greenhouse. Because what stood behind that pain wasn't just Elizabeth's reflection. It was her fate. And it wasn't done. Not yet. Mr. Merrick had worked the Ashbourne grounds for over 40 years. Clara found him seated beneath the gnarled oak at the far edge of the property. His hands, warped by decades of labor, trembled as he trimmed the edge of a dead root, staring at nothing. He looked like he'd been waiting for her. "You've been to the glass house," he said without turning. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded. He sighed. "Then you've seen her." Clara froze. "Seen who?" He chuckled, bitter. "That ain't Elizabeth anymore. Hasn't been for years." The silence turned metallic. Thick. Impossible to swallow. Clara knelt beside him. "What do you mean? You saw her that night, didn't you?" He nodded slowly, eyes brimming with things he'd buried deep. "She came out of that greenhouse at dusk, but her shadow came out first. I swear it." Clara's breath caught. "She asked me the strangest thing," he went on. "Do you remember what year it is?" I told her it was 1891. She laughed and said no. "It's 1887. You just think it's 1891. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She said the house kept shifting, like time itself was folding inward. I thought she was sick, fevered maybe, but her eyes, they weren't like before. They were clear. Too clear. Clara whispered, "Did she go back inside?" Merrick nodded, said she had to fix what the glass had opened. She told me if anyone ever asked, to say she vanished in the woods, because that was easier. Then he looked Clara dead in the eye. "But I know what I saw. She didn't leave this estate. She just fell into it. Fell into it." The words didn't even sound real. But Clara felt it. Like the walls had ears. Like the trees had kept secrets. Like the glass house had always been the center of it all. Clara stood up slowly. "What happens if I go back?" she asked. Merrick didn't answer. He just stared at the horizon, and then said quietly, "Just don't look in the pane with no reflection." 3 days after speaking to Mr. Merrick, Clara awoke to the sound of the butler pounding on her door. "A telegram, miss. Delivered just now, urgent." She sat up, groggy, still half submerged in the fog of dreams. "Who's it from?" The butler looked pale. "You'd best read it yourself." She tore open the envelope. It was dated July 17th, 1891, but the postmark was not from Ashbourne. It was from a town called North Cross. Clara's stomach dropped. There was no such town on the map. Not anymore. She knew because she'd looked. North Cross had been swallowed by a flood in 1852 and officially dissolved by Parliament 10 years later. No one lived there. No one could. The message read, "Clara, they are lying to you. I never left. I am under the house. But not in the way you think. The hourglass must break. Elizabeth." Clara's hands trembled. Under the house? She flipped the telegram over. No return address. Just the imprint of something scorched into the bottom of the page. An hourglass symbol, broken in half. The hourglass must break. She didn't know what it meant. But every instinct screamed that it was a metaphor. It was instruction. The house was silent around her. Heavier than usual. Almost listening. She stuffed the telegram into her coat and made her way downstairs. The portraits lining the hall felt wrong. The eyes followed her too smoothly, too deliberately. In the parlor, she found the blueprint of the estate she'd taken from the study. She laid it out on the floor. There, beneath the drawing room, hidden behind structural overlays, was a small rectangular shape. Unlabeled. Inaccessible by staircase or door. But it existed. Clara circled it in pencil. Under the house. She stood and looked around the room as if she expected the walls to shift, the doors to warp, the air itself to confess. Then she turned back to the blueprint, pressed her palm against the space she'd circled, and whispered, "Elizabeth, I'm coming." Clara waited until nightfall. She knew the staff would be asleep. The estate, though vast and grand, was mostly empty now. Since the scandal, the family had slowly disappeared, first from society, then from the rooms, then from memory. She moved quietly, oil lamp in hand, and descended into the wine cellar. The blueprint had shown something behind the west wall, stonework that didn't match the rest of the structure. Newer, cleaner. Sealed. She tapped it gently. Hollow. Clara retrieved a rusted iron rod and began to pry. The stone groaned, then cracked. Cold air rushed out, foul and thick, like something dead had been waiting. Behind the wall was a narrow tunnel, earthen, hand-dug, and lined with wooden beams blackened by age or fire. She hesitated at the entrance, then stepped in. The passage grew darker as she moved forward. The walls closed in, and the air grew wet and humming. At one point she thought she heard whispering, faint and low, like breath brushing her neck, but every time she turned there was nothing. 27 paces in, the tunnel opened into a chamber. And there, she saw it. A stone slab. Chains. And the outline of a figure still bound to it, skin shriveled tight around bone, ashen and silent. But the thing that turned Clara's blood to ice wasn't the corpse. It was the mirror, standing directly across from a body. Ornate. Victorian. Cracked. In the reflection, the woman on the slab was alive. Eyes wide. Mouth agape in silent scream. Clara staggered back. The mirror shimmered. A flash of red blinked through the crack. A voice, soft and guttural, whispered, "You broke the hourglass. Now time breaks you." She dropped the lamp. The flame hissed against the damp floor. Darkness swallowed her, but not before she saw the corpse twitch. Just once. Enough to know she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Clara ran. But the tunnel behind her seemed longer than before, stretching, warping, refusing to let her out. The shadows whispered names she didn't know. Her own breath echoed like it belonged to someone else. When she finally emerged into the cellar, she slammed the hidden wall shut and collapsed. Her skin was clammy. Her heart, erratic. Something had shifted. It wasn't just that she had seen a dead woman twitch. It was the mirror, the reflection, the voice, and the scent. Faint but familiar. Lilac and rose. The same perfume Emmeline wore the day she vanished. Clara didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the drawing room, staring at the fireplace, her thoughts spinning through time like a broken reel. She began to write everything she'd seen in her notebook. Details, sensations, timestamps. It was the only way she could stay sane. She needed to see it in ink. She needed to know it was real. And then she remembered the black book. The one she'd taken from the attic on her first night in Ashbourne. She hadn't dared open it since. Now, her hands trembling, she did. It wasn't a diary. It was a ledger, but not for money. Names, dates, symbols, and beneath every name, a phrase scrawled in the same jagged hand. Accepted the offering. Clara flipped through the pages. There, under 1886, was Emmeline, and below her name, in faded ink. She saw the mirror. She knew. She was taken. Clara's throat closed. She had thought this was a disappearance. It wasn't. It was a transaction, a pact, an inheritance of silence and horror. And now, her name would be next. She stood slowly, and for the first time since arriving, she heard footsteps upstairs. Heavy, deliberate. She was no longer alone in the house. But whatever had joined her wasn't human. Clara couldn't breathe. The air in this version of the room was colder, as if time itself had stopped flowing. Everything was too still, too quiet. Even the flicker of the hearth no longer gave warmth. She reached for the door, but there was no handle. No seams. Just stone. This was not a room anymore. It was a tomb. On the far side, the mirror stood again. But now it pulsed faintly, not like light, but like a heartbeat. And beside it stood a figure in robes older than the manor itself. His face was veiled, not hidden, just blurred, the way a memory looks after too many years. Clara Worthing, he said without moving his lips. You were not summoned. And yet, you are here. She stepped back, heart pounding. Where is Emmeline? The figure tilted its head. She gave herself to the old ceremony. You remember the name? Clara did. It had been scratched into Emmeline's diary. Once, then ripped out. Ritus Umbri, the ritual of shadows. An old rite whispered about during the Ashbourne founding. A way to escape death, or worse, to trade places with it. Clara shook her head. She was trying to escape you. She begged to be seen. The figure hissed. You forget the hunger of a house that remembers every soul it consumes. The walls shifted. Suddenly, Clara was in the great hall. But now, hundreds of versions of Emmeline stood in silence. All slightly different. Older, younger, wild-eyed, dead-eyed, each a failed echo, each a consequence. Which one is she? Clara cried. The figure stepped forward. She is none of them, because she was the only one who succeeded. Clara turned, and behind her, the real Emmeline stood. But she wasn't the woman who vanished. She was the one who survived inside the mirror. Changed. Enhanced. No one saved me, Emmeline said quietly. So now, I save no one. Clara staggered back from Emmeline. This was no reunion. No tearful embrace. What stood before her was not the fragile woman torn from a lavish world of silk and ballrooms. It was something forged in silence, reshaped by shadows and fed on solitude. Emmeline, Clara whispered, reaching out. But her fingers met nothing. Emmeline flickered, not as an illusion, but as something that wasn't entirely there. Like she stood between frames of reality, part in this world, part in a place only the manor could name. You searched for me, Emmeline said, but you never asked why I disappeared. I thought you were taken, Clara breathed. I was, Emmeline replied, but not by force. I walked in. I chose it. The weight of her words crushed the breath out of Clara. She had spent years chasing clues, haunting archives, enduring whispers of madness and scandal. And now, the woman she sought had not been a victim, but a volunteer. I had to, Emmeline said. The ceremony required a willing sacrifice. My husband refused to be devoured, so I offered myself. Clara's eyes filled with horror. You offered yourself to what? The walls trembled. The manor groaned. From somewhere deep beneath, a sound rose, wet, primal, ancient, like breathing, but not from lungs, from stone. I was promised knowledge, Emmeline said, and freedom from the world that shackled me. But the truth is more exacting. Clara stared into her cousin's eyes. There was no hatred in them, only distance, emptiness, the haunting serenity of someone who had been replaced. You can still leave, Emmeline whispered, but if you stay, your questions will be answered. All of them. In return, you will never sleep again. The mirror pulsed behind her, casting flickering shadows across the floor. Clara stepped back, but her feet would not move. Because the worst kind of prison is not built from walls. It's built from the need to know. Clara stood at the threshold. Behind her, the illusion of freedom, the life she could still return to, hollow and unknowing. Ahead, Ashbourne's final truth. The reason for Emmeline's disappearance. The force that demanded silence, secrecy, sacrifice. She took a breath and stepped forward. The mirror shuddered. Its surface rippled like black water. Then it swallowed her whole. Darkness. Not absence, but density. A pressure against the skin. A cold that crept inside the bones. And then light. Not from above, but below. She opened her eyes. She stood not in a room, but a cathedral. Underground. Stone pillars twisted like roots. Massive archways stretched into impossible heights, vanishing into shadow. Along the walls were carvings, faces contorted in pain, mouths open as if screaming into eternity. And at the center, it waited, not a god, not a demon, but something before both. It had no name Clara could speak, only shapes, only presence. It sat on a throne of bone and black iron, eyes like coals trapped in ice. Around it floated pages, parchments of history not written by man, but remembered by the house, bound by blood and pact. She fell to her knees, not from reverence, but gravity. The weight of this thing's memory was crushing. She could feel every person it had ever consumed, every lie it had ever whispered into the minds of kings and clergy. It was the source of Ashbourne, of the ritual, of the circle, and it had chosen Emmeline. Now watch Clara. You wanted truth, it said, in a voice that bypassed her ears and burrowed into her skull. You wanted answers. Clara's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. The voice grew louder. Then answer this. Why do you think she disappeared and not you? She gasped, because she had been meant to. From the beginning, Emmeline had taken her place, broken the cycle. But now, the house had found the one it was promised. Clara trembled beneath the cathedral's ceiling of shadows. The being on the throne, the one that sat beneath Ashbourne for centuries, spoke no further. It didn't need to. Its silence was far louder than its words. She rose slowly, not from strength, but compulsion. Around her, the floating pages turned on their own, each revealing moments lost to history, names erased, disappearances framed as suicide, madness, or scandal. The circle had always covered its tracks, and the house had been its mouthpiece. But now, Claire saw the page meant for her. It hovered before her face, blank at first. Then, in blood-red script, it wrote itself. Clara Whitmore, the offering who refused. The words pulsed as if alive, and then they caught fire. But the page did not burn. Instead, it split open. From within, a scream echoed, not Clara's but Emmeline's. Not from the past, but from now. Clara spun around, and the walls of the underground cathedral bled into a new vision. Ashbourne, but before it became Ashbourne. Fields, a village, a small church. The land was pure, unclaimed. But beneath it, even then, the thing had already rooted itself. She saw Emmeline walking barefoot in a long white gown, eyes closed, guided by something unseen. Her hands outstretched like a marionette controlled by forgotten strings. And then Emmeline stopped. She turned, looked directly at Clara, not through the vision, but at her, and mouthed the words, "Run." But Clara could not, because she now realized there was no escaping Ashbourne. There never was. The manor wasn't just a place. It was a womb for something older than history, and it had made her its heir. Clara's bloodline wasn't just connected to the land. Her ancestors summoned it, built the house to contain it. And when they failed to control it, they fed it instead. Wives, daughters, sisters, generation after generation. Until Emmeline broke the chain. And now, Clara was the correction. The final piece. Beneath the altar, inside a cavity carved from black stone, sat an object not meant to exist. Not forged, but born. It pulsed with a strange warmth, and the air around it seemed to hum with a voice that was not quite sound. Something older, more direct. Clara reached forward, knowing what it was before her fingers even brushed against it. It was not a weapon, not in the traditional sense. It was a vow made solid. The blade looked simple, iron, etched with symbols older than English, older than Latin. But as soon as Clara touched it, the room responded. The walls expanded outward, groaning. The altar trembled. The entire cathedral seemed to inhale. And the voice returned. Not spoken. It existed within her now. To kill it, you must become it. She wanted to scream, but couldn't, because part of her already understood. This wasn't about defeating evil. This was about inheriting it, reshaping it, or letting it consume her like it had all the others. The weapon wasn't just for killing the creature. It was for binding it. If she drove the blade into the center of the pulsing symbol above the throne, where the circle had long whispered its rights, she could trap the entity. Not banish it, not destroy it, but contain it, as her bloodline had once tried to do. But that would also seal her fate. She would not leave the house. She would become the house. A guardian, a prisoner, a warning. And in the moment she realized this, Clara also understood why Emmeline disappeared without a trace. Because she had tried to do the same thing and failed. That vision of Emmeline mouthing "run" was not a plea. It was a memory. Clara now stood at the same crossroads. Behind her, she could feel the shadows folding in. The circle, the congregation, the house itself. In front of her, the throne and the pulsing heart of the thing that fed on time, blood, and silence. She could run, or she could end it. At the cost of everything, Clara raised the blade. It wasn't courage that moved her hand. It was clarity. A horrifying, bone-deep certainty that what had haunted her family wasn't a metaphor or madness. It was real. It had always been real. And it fed on time, lineage, and unspoken pacts. Every generation, someone paid the price. This time, it would be her. But just as she stepped forward, she heard something behind her. A breath. A whisper. A name she had not heard in years. Clara. Her hand froze. From the shadows near the door, a figure stepped forward. Her father, Elliot Marchand, dead for over 15 years. Or so she had believed. He looked older, worn, eyes blackened by decades of knowledge he was never meant to carry. He wasn't surprised to see her. He wasn't relieved. He looked like a man who had tried to stop this very moment and failed. "You were never supposed to find this place," he said, voice hoarse. "Not you. You're dead," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, I stayed. Someone had to watch it. Someone had to keep it dormant." The blade in her hand felt heavier now, more sacred. She looked at him, this ghost of the man who had vanished without explanation, and asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" He stepped closer, slowly. "Because they were watching. The circle. The house. They made me choose. Just like they're making you choose." Suddenly, the room grew colder. The stone beneath their feet vibrated. Something was coming. Drawn by the blade. Drawn by her blood. Her father grabbed her wrist. "Don't use it. You don't understand what it costs." But she pulled away. "Then tell me what Emmeline did. Tell me what she became." His silence said enough. She turned toward the altar. He shouted behind her, "Clara, if you bury it again, you buy us 50 more years. If you use it, I end it." And then the walls bled. Crimson ran down the stone. The air cracked open, and the circle, no longer hiding, entered the chamber. Clapping, smiling. They had not come to stop her. They had come to witness it. There were 13 of them, cloaked in robes the color of rot and ash. Faces obscured by silver masks, each carved with a different emotion: rage, sorrow, bliss, fear. Their presence was silent but overwhelming, as if the air itself was bowing before them. The circle. Clara's breath hitched as they surrounded the altar. Her father stepped back, resigned. He had seen this moment before, perhaps in visions, perhaps in dreams. But Clara stood still, eyes locked on the tallest among them. He removed his mask. Beneath it was a face she recognized. Lord Thaddeus Wexley, the same man who had attended her engagement dinner. A friend of her father, a benefactor of the town, a man who had sent flowers when Emmeline vanished. "You've always been one of us," he said quietly. "You just didn't know it." She gripped the blade tighter. "What is this?" "A bloodline. A covenant older than Ashbourne itself," he said. "This estate was never about wealth. It was a vault, a gate, and every few generations, one of us must return to open it. For what? To feed it, to preserve the balance. That was Emmeline's role. She refused. Clara stared at him. And you killed her? He shook his head. No. She opened it too early. She misunderstood what the ritual demands. She thought sacrifice was enough. But it wants legacy. It wants someone who chooses. A second figure removed their mask. It was her mother's cousin, Margaret, believed to have died in a fire when Clara was a child. Another unspoken loss. You see, Margaret whispered, we've all chosen. That's why we remain. You want me to join you? Clara said. We want you to survive. The altar pulsed. The stone cracked. A red mist seeped from its center, and Clara felt it enter her skin like frostbite. Then Lord Wexley spoke once more. Place the blade on the altar, and it ends. The door stays shut another generation. And if I don't, he smiled faintly, then the gate opens, and the world will remember what your family locked away in 1891. The circle fell silent. The choice was hers. Clara looked at the blade. Her fingers began to tremble. The blade hovered over the altar. Time, it seemed, held its breath. Clara could hear nothing but the sharp beat of her own heart. The circle stood motionless, waiting, not for obedience but for initiation. Then something shifted. The mist turned cold. Not just cold, but conscious. It slithered up her wrist, tracing the veins beneath her skin like it recognized her. Like it was calling her back. And then, a voice. Not from the room, but from the stone itself. You're not the first to choose. It was Emmeline. Faint, fractured, as though she were speaking through glass, submerged in water. Clara, she whispered again. They lied. Clara blinked, her eyes darting to Lord Wexley. But he stood still, head bowed. Don't place the blade, Emmeline's voice trembled, or you'll bind yourself forever to them. The circle remained eerily calm. They could not hear what she heard. That much was clear. What happens if I walk away? Clara asked aloud. No one answered. She looked down at the blade. It was humming now, vibrating softly in her grip. The altar had begun to fracture. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. A dull red glow leaked through like the heartbeat of something ancient and buried. Emmeline, Clara whispered. Are you alive? Another pause. And then, no. But I'm not dead, either. The voice broke like a sob. They locked me in it. In the gate. I chose wrong. Clara stepped back, the blade still trembling in her grip. Wexley opened his eyes. She's manipulating you, he said softly. That voice is what remains of her madness. The gate consumed her. It always consumes the unworthy. Clara turned to him. You said it needed someone who chooses. I choose not to join you. The circle stirred. Margaret's face paled. No, she whispered. Clara, if you walk away, the gate doesn't close. It opens. Clara tightened her grip on the blade, and instead of lowering it to the altar, she raised it toward the circle. I'm ending this. All of it. And without hesitation, she smashed the blade against the altar's surface. The entire manor shook. Stone screamed. Light poured from the cracks. And in that instant, Clara saw what her sister saw in her final moment. Not death, not sacrifice, but the face of something that had been waiting beneath Ashbourne since before the town existed. The altar shattered. What emerged from beneath it was not light, but memory. Reality twisted. The manor floor peeled back like pages of a rotted book. The walls wept blood. Paintings melted into smoke. Fireplaces screamed. And Clara was no longer in Ashbourne. She was inside it. A realm beneath history. A place made of thought, sin, and the weight of decisions never made. All around her, pieces of time looped and replayed. She saw Wexley as a boy, kneeling in the garden, burying something wrapped in lace. She saw Margaret screaming beneath the estate as her twin brother, yes, twin, was taken by the gate. She saw Emmeline, night after night, carving symbols into her skin, trying to appease whatever had whispered to her in the mirror. And finally, Clara saw herself. Not standing, but weeping on a bed. Not in the present, but 5 years ago, the night of her marriage. The gate didn't just show truth. It showed regret. You were never meant to find me, Emmeline whispered behind her. Clara turned. Her sister stood in the mist, her eyes milky, her voice distorted. But it was her, Unaged, untouched, unfree. I broke it. I broke the seal. I let it in. Clara stepped forward. Let what in? But Emmeline's form was already fading. And behind her, something began to take shape. Not a demon, not a god. A concept made flesh. A being formed of all the wrong choices made in silence. Of women silenced. Of power taken, not earned. Of Ashbourne's secret sin. It wasn't here to hurt Clara. It was here to finish the story. The circle had not been serving it. They had been trapping it for generations. The blade wasn't an offering. It was a key, and Clara had just opened the final lock. Ashbourne's bells rang, not above but beneath the ground. The manor groaned. The gate behind the altar split wide. Not into hell, not into fire, but into what came before words were spoken. Clara understood then. This was never about her sister's disappearance. This was about the lie of lineage, the illusion of control, and a family's desperate attempt to bury what they had once invited. The gate demanded payment. Not gold, not blood, memory, truth, presence. As Clara stood on the threshold, windless air pulled her toward the chasm behind the altar, a place outside time. The walls of Ashbourne roared, but the sound came from within her mind. The circle had tried to contain this force, this ancient thing made of fear, silence, and generations of lies. They never understood it. They only feared it. The Wexleys had built their empire on that fear, feeding it through ritual and silence. Every generation had chosen a woman to erase, sacrificed to keep the rest of the family powerful, visible, respected. Emmeline had been the last chosen, but Clara was different. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She stepped forward. And for a moment, Ashbourne stopped screaming. The air turned still, and the thing that had haunted this bloodline bowed its head. Not in submission, but in recognition, because Clara did not come to hide the truth. She came to carry it. Ashbourne collapsed behind her. The walls caved, devoured by silence. The gate shut, but not with violence, with finality. The manor was gone by dawn. The only thing left in its place was the fountain. Still, cracked, and full of something that looked like ash, but shimmered like memory. Clara Wexley was never seen again. No obituary, no announcement, no trace. Just her wedding ring, placed gently on the fountain's edge, next to a single piece of lace. And that symbol, the one carved into the altar, was scorched into the ground where the house once stood. What happened to Clara was not a disappearance. It was a choice. To end the story, the Wexleys refused to close. To free the silence that had bound every woman before her. And to enter the forgotten place where names vanish and truth becomes breathless. Some say if you stand on the old Ashbourne land during winter, you can still hear her whisper. Not every gate opens to hell. Some open to truth. So tell us, would you walk through? If you've made it this far, you've seen the truth few ever will. Comment below. The gate remembers. Say it again. The gate remembers. Like, subscribe, share. This was DeadScroll, and Ashbourne's silence has spoken. Until next time, stay haunted, stay awake.